So hello, Alex. The floor is all yours.
Well, thank you, Alex. As you said, we are in downtown Kyiv, actually, and more specifically, in a trade house union, which is quite a symbolic place here. After the event of the Euromaidan in 2014, it was rebuilt, so that's why it was important for us to do this series of interview. Now, we are joined here by Colonel Oleksiy Nozdrachov, who is the head of the Civil and Military Cooperation Department of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. With Mr. Nozdrachov, we're going to debunk myths about Donbass and Ukraine's army. Hello, and thank you for being with us today. So first and before we begin the interview, I suggest we watch a little bit of a sujet that we did about Ukrainian army. Let's watch.
Since the beginning of the war in Ukraine, Russian officials and state-controlled media have focused huge resources on portraying the fighting in the Donbass as an internal conflict.
Киевские власти развязали гражданскую войну на юго-востоке Украины, пошли против тех, кто отказался принять результаты майданного госпереворота.
Yet, time and time again, photos and videos uploaded to social media prove the presence of Russian service personnel and military equipment in the Donbass region. Lieutenant General Serhiy Nayev, the former commander of the Joint Forces operation, estimates that out of at least 32,000 fighters in occupied Donbass, around 11,000 are Russian citizens.
Officers and generals of Russia's armed forces are holding leadership positions in these armed formations. I have to note that this is not some volunteer militia, but regular forces. In their system, they are part of the 8th Combined Army Unit, which is stationed in the town of Novocherkassk in Russia.
Around 2.5% of mainland Ukraine is under the effective control of the Russian authorities, while pushing the idea that just local militia groups are involved in fighting. Moscow has been unable to convincingly explain how sophisticated Russian-made military equipment appeared on Ukrainian soil.
All of the weaponry, meaning tanks, armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery systems, and multiple launch rocket systems were produced in Russia and delivered to the occupied territories from there. They are also using the newest type of Russian weaponry.
50 types of modern Russian military technology have been spotted in the war zone since 2014. This is according to Ukrainian investigative volunteer organization Inform Napalm.
We are specifically talking about new developments which could not have been used by the Ukrainian military and were never used by the Soviet military. Russia is the only country which has it and produces it.
For example, here is a Russian T-72B3 tank. Russia started mass-producing this modification in 2011 at the Uralvagonozavod factory in the city of Nizhny Tagil. The Russian military put these tanks into service in 2014.
Our team noticed them during the Battle of Debaltseve in February 2015, thanks to the efforts of propagandist Graham Phillips, who filmed these new Russian tanks moving towards the front line.
This is a BPM-97 Vystrel. The Russian military began using them in 2008. It was assembled at the Remdiesel factory in the town of Naberezhnye Chelny. Ukraine never imported this armored vehicle, yet they were spotted in the occupied territories of the Luhansk region. Here are the same vehicles moving as part of a Russian convoy through the once occupied town of Sorokine, which was then called Krasnodon. They were filmed in January 2015, when the town was occupied by Russian hybrid forces, and this BPM-97 was parked on a street in the occupied city of Luhansk for several days. Over the course of the war, the newest Russian drones were spotted in the skies of Donbass. For example, the Orlan-10 is a multifunctional unmanned aerial vehicle produced in St. Petersburg. The Russian armed forces began using it in 2010. This UAV was spotted over Ukrainian territory in October 2018, where it was spying the Ukrainian military Mi-24 helicopter, which shot down the drone, and the remains of it were later found and studied. This is all just a small part of the evidence of Russia's military intervention in eastern Ukraine, reported by Artem Holob for UATV.
Now, the Kremlin calls the war in Donbass from the very beginning an Ukraine internal conflict. How come this outrageous lie is still out there?
First of all, we should understand that the very first sign of Russian invasion was invasion by propaganda and brainwashing technologies. And of course, the international society, as well as Ukrainian law and Ukrainian people, understand that this is pure Russian hybrid style invasion immediately after occupation of Crimea Peninsula. We should understand that in 2014, before the invasion, it was no land forces units allocated in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. Frankly speaking, nobody expected Russia, as one of the members of Budapest agreement, be the biggest threat for Ukrainian independence. The only way to convince the whole world that Ukrainian military conflict is internal conflict, not Russian aggression, Russia used very sophisticated propaganda and very sophisticated brainwashing technology. Economy on the occupied territory getting worse and worse. And we can compare situation on liberated territories and situation on occupied territories. And of course, it scares Russian government. Ukraine is growing. Ukraine has pure and obvious European future. And people became awakened and understand that Russian aggression has nothing but dead end for future of this region.
Now, as we saw in the topic, there's a lot of evidence that Russia is here. Could be weapons, could be tanks. How come that these evidence didn't come to the eyes of the public, and that some medias, even recently, I guess it was in Vice magazine, even still call it a civil war without even taking into account this evidence presented by the OSCE monitoring missions? Right.
First of all, even OSCE mission on Donetsk and Lugansk, in Donetsk and Lugansk, they already have got several evidence of Russian weapon on Ukrainian territory. And of course, especially for heavy weapon like artillery, tanks, for sophisticated jamming technologies, which Russia are using on occupied territory as test area for new systems. They are produced in Russia, and they're used by Russia only. But we should remember that Russian media and Russian government informational technology are so well designed and so effective so that they are able to target multi-layerly different audiences. First of all, their own population. Secondary population of European and Western countries. And of course, unfortunately, we are still not very effective to protect our own Ukrainian population against Russian propaganda. And even some couple of Russian successes in terms of foreign policy and their big comeback in European politics, and now we can see some discussion about their return to J7. This is also, unfortunately, their great success of their informational and political efforts, what they do within the last 5 years.
You seem to stress that there is the physical front line, of course, but the informational front line, let's say information war, is quite important here. What kind of means does have Ukraine to fight against this information war and make people aware of that this is not a civil war, this is actually a war waged by Russia?
Right. We should understand that the state power has just four means: diplomatic, informational, military, and economic. Ukraine decided to be European democratic country. And of course, we are not able and cannot use propaganda. Everything we can use is pure truth and pure evidences, especially concerning war on the East. But for Russia, our democratic values and European democratic values, they treat it as our weakness, and they exploit their illegal brainwashing technologies to, I would say, massively overrun our informational technologies and informational efforts which we are trying to build and trying to sell within democratic values. What we can do, Russia will be very effective within very short, nearest future. Why? Their informational technology are very simple but very massive. What we can do, it is education of our population, it is increasing informational efforts abroad, especially among our allies and neighbors, and diplomatic and legal framework which our foreign policy is able to exploit in order to both protect our own population, protect population of our allies, and pull back Russian propaganda.
But are these means, as you said, Russia sees certain democratic means as weaknesses, are these means strong enough to fight against someone who obviously doesn't respect some country, who doesn't respect international law and the treaties and the Budapest Memorandum, as you said?
Well, authoritarian regimes are always stronger than democratic countries on a very short period of time. Democracy, it is ability and opportunity for both leaders, governments, and people to build their own society around equal opportunities and prosperity and economical growth. If we're talking about the Russian style, which is obvious authoritarian style, we can see between 1% to 2% of population be very rich and the rest just to be below the line. But they have money, wild money, to invest in massive informational technologies. So this is why very short period of time strategies will be very successful. But only step by step, democratic values can beat them back.
Now we talked about informational war. Now let's go back to the physical war itself. Since 2014, Ukrainian army has evolved a lot. Can you assess a few big, let's say, big changes, the big improvement, but maybe also the challenges that the Ukrainian army is still facing today?
Well, it is obvious that Ukrainian army has a huge success right now, and is one of the most experienced and very sophisticated, well, at least within the European armies. But I think the number one success is huge support from Ukrainian people, which Ukrainian army didn't have back in 2014. Now, people and government of Ukraine are with army, and we can see the different ratings. For last 5 years, Ukrainian armed forces is number one, sometimes number two against volunteers and NGOs who support both army and local population. But back to physical means, definitely Ukrainian army got new sophisticated weapon for first of all, anti-tank capabilities of Russian armed forces. Our special forces now are one of the best in the world. Unfortunately, received experience in the war. Our radars, our snipers, our airborne troops, and our intelligence means are way better and finally cross the requirements of 21st century warfare. So we can see technological jump supported by huge support from the people, which makes Ukraine unbeatable against Russian aggression.
Now, it's quite interesting, as you said, that in 2014 there wasn't that much support. How come? Because the war was waged at that moment, that the support wasn't big, and what changed in Ukrainian mentality at the very least at this kind of, let's say, support for Ukrainian army changed?
Right. Frankly speaking, and this is my opinion, we were spoiled by Budapest Agreement feelings. And what we've lost patriotic education of our population, and we've lost battle against corruption and oligarchy in Ukraine. So this is why people were not very keen to support Ukrainian armed forces in 2014, because this lack of patriotic education, starting from kindergarten up to university and the family. But unfortunately, with our blood in the battlefields, Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, we rebuild this capability. And now most of the families, most of the kindergartens and schools are starting their education with patriotic things. And you can see what's going on in downtown during Independence Day. This is clear transitioning of Ukrainian mentality from post-Soviet to new independent Ukrainian ideology and Ukrainian mentality.
Now, that's for the education. You raised the issue of corruption. What are the means being put now by the new government, and according to you, and you saw you're in the army, what are the means being put in place to fight against this rampant corruption, which actually plagues the country and, as you said, plagues the army?
Well, I'm not expert in the war against corruption, frankly speaking. Everything I can say, new government, new president, and in the future new government, they just have to implement everything they promised people. All their ideas, all their lozungs, all their offers, they are very democratic. They are anti-corruption and anti-oligarchic. So for me, it's very simple. Just do everything you promised to your people. And based on the latest messages from President of Ukraine and his office, they are going to be very furious against Ukrainian corruption. And I think in near future, I don't expect any success within months or two. It will take time. It will take time, but I believe my children will be living in new country with one of the lowest level of corruption and one of the most effective economy in Europe.
Now, on a more global, because we talked about domestic policy here, let's talk about a more global way. According, in terms of NATO standards and leadership and personnel, how would you evaluate the army today compared to 2014?
Right. First of all, this year is very crucial for Ukrainian command and control and Ukrainian armed forces. Until end of the year, Ukrainian general staff and HQs of military services will be transitioning to J structure, which is interoperable structure to NATO countries. Ukraine already implemented many standards of NATO, especially in terms of logistic sharing of information, command and control, language, which is requirement #1 for NATO interoperability. But we are still on the way to change our mentality and military culture. But we already made first step, and I believe we have no chance to turn back. And one of the recent success is our participation in multinational exercise, especially our special operation team, which was evaluated in accordance with NATO standard, and they received very high evaluation. And I think within 5 to 10 years, Ukraine will be completely interoperable, not only in terms of language and command and control, but I believe in terms of equipment and in terms of military culture as well.
Now, you used these words earlier, Ukraine is being Russia's playground. What can the West learn from the Ukrainian experience through fighting? You talked about experience of soldiers, of course, but overall, what can Western countries learn from this conflict?
First of all, unfortunately, Ukraine now is one of the best hybrid war training area. We are target of Russian propaganda, and Russian hybrid means which are used on my territory, on our territory since 2014. And we are the best example of future hybrid threat, which will be, unfortunately, spread around the world. And Russia is not only source of this hybrid threat. We can see the Islamic radical movements. We can see radical movements in Asia, and all of them, even having different ideas, they have the same nature. And this is what our Western partners and allies can learn from us. And we are more than open to share this information for them.
Now, I want to focus a little bit on other issues that go throughout the Ukrainian society. Recently, actually, yesterday, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that more structure would be created to help veterans. What concrete steps? What are these concrete steps? What does it mean helping the veterans coming back from war right now?
Well, unfortunately, I cannot commend my president, and he has his office to do that.
That's a fair point.
To do that. Now we have Minister of Veterans Affairs. And the very good sign of this ministry is that the leadership of this ministry, most of them are veterans with combat experience, been wounded in the war, and they know this problem from inside. I think the presidential office and his team, they are young and innovative experts. And what they do, they are talking to people, and they are listening veterans, and I hope they will continue to do that. So economy is probably one of the biggest part of this issue. Big and successful economy will bring more capabilities and means for social protection of veterans, and especially for those who were wounded, for family who lost their sons and husbands, and they will need support from the government. And I think the good thing we already started. And good thing the whole people of Ukraine and new president and his team are very involved. So with help of Ukrainian veterans and Ukrainian armed forces and other military formation which we have, we will build a very effective system. But economy is number one.
Now, one of the key points of the program of Mr. Zelensky is peace in the Donbass. There are many ways to achieve it, through negotiations. How do you, for example, how do people in the army perceive the potential draft plan for peace in the Donbass, and also, more extensively, how could it be done according to you? What are the steps to put in place according to you?
Right. President has all necessary means, diplomatic, information, military and economical, to establish peace, not only on Donbass, but to take Crimea back. Military is just one of his options. And right now, Ukrainian military leadership, as well as officers and NCO, we understand that everything we can do for the President Peace Program is to create conditions for civil society, for civil institutions and legal institution and government of Ukraine to start dialogue and economical development of the region. Only massive professional foreign policy and effective economical development on the east and in whole Ukraine will bring people from occupied territory back to Ukrainian hands. And this is only way to re-establish peace on the east and to return Crimea Peninsula back to under Ukrainian governance.
Now, you are the head of the Civil and Military Cooperation Department of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. It's quite interesting because that's where actually the relations between civilians and military forces work. Would you say that how important it is to create that relation between civilians and military here? How fundamental is it?
Right. First of all, Civil Military Cooperation, or CIMIC, it is NATO standard, which our army established back in 2014. Of course, we've had some successful history since 1992, our participation in peacekeeping operations, but very seriously, we have started thinking about it in 2014, and we understand why. Since 2015, we are building this capability. We were just 14 officers in 2015, and now around 200 in all levels of military command and control system. Current war and military conflicts in 21st century will be conflicts among people and on urban territories. Protection of civilians and thinking about civilian infrastructure is two keys to success of military operation. CIMIC provides standards, capability, and appropriate mindset to help Ukrainian armed forces transitioning from 20th century to 21st century hybrid warfare, and not to fight for victory, but fight for people, for their protection, and for their economical prosperity.
Now, you talked about the improvement of the CIMIC forces, so to say. On your personal point of view, what can be improved now? What are the challenges expecting the CIMIC and on a wider level, let's say, Ukrainian army in general for the future, peace or not?
CIMIC, it is not just a couple of people or set of capabilities. CIMIC, it is a mindset from soldier to 4-star general to understand that army is surrounded by civilians, and only if these civilians are fighting this war with you, for you, and they watch your back, providing you with soldiers, appropriate equipment and technologies, this is only conditions which will bring victory and peace for Ukraine, and of course future economical and political development in the war zones. I don't want to say we are one of the best, but the good sign is our partners, especially our Baltic brother in arms, they are already very interesting in our CIMIC development of these standards in Ukrainian armed forces, and even we train them how to use CIMIC standards for war on your territory, because pure NATO CIMIC is the standard for war abroad, for peacekeeping operation or war somewhere else. Ukraine used these standards and improving the standards, fighting the war on own territory. So this is why we are very interesting for our partners, and we are eager to share our experience.
Now, and to conclude this interview, I wouldn't say on a more personal note, but as of today, as of the head of the Civil and Military Cooperation Department of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, what can you say to people on the front line right now? I mean, civilians and soldiers who are still fighting for the sake of Ukraine's territorial integrity.
Right. First of all, I would like to say Happy Independence Day.
Let's say that's it.
I would like to say Happy Independence to both the military personnel and to those brave civilians who are still in war zone, living their lives and supporting Ukrainian armed forces. It's because their joint effort, it's because their comprehensive approach to rebuild peace and economical and social situation in Donetsk and Lugansk. We are here in Kiev, have some time and some capability to think and to build our future, to invest more in military, social and economical efforts on the east of Ukraine. And I would like to say thank you to you, and thank you to families of those military who are fighting this war and unfortunately who were killed during this military conflict, protecting us and future of Ukraine for our children. Happy independence, and I wish you from myself and from whole Ukrainian armed forces all the best, and protect our children and our future.
Well, thank you very much for this interview. It was a pleasure to have you in our outdoor studio and special outdoor studio today. That was Colonel Oleksiy Nozdrachov. He is the head of the Civil and Military Cooperation Department of the Ukrainian Armed Forces. Now we continue our multilanguage marathon. Throughout the day we'll tell you about Ukraine's independence, the price the country paid for it, and the heroes, of course, who defended it. So stay tuned with UATV for more.